A museum ship. What is a museum ship? They are ships of bygone eras that have been preserved as museums for future generations to see. So what exactly were these ships that I'm about to say, and what roles do they serve? And why do I think they should have been preserved? Now, the first on this list is the German battlecruiser SMS Gobin. First created on August 28th, 1909, it was launched in March of also 29th, 1911. She was the second of two Moltke-class battlecruisers of the Imperial German Navy, that is, the German Empire, not Nazi Germany. That's the Kriegsmarine. She was named after August Karl von Gobin, General of the Kingdom of Prussia and a veteran of the Franco-Prussian War. A year after its launch, the SMS Gobin and the newly launched light carrier SMS Breslau became part of the Mediterranean Division, which, well, patrols the Mediterranean seas. It was created in response to the two Balkan Wars. When World War I broke out, the two ships had raced to Constantinople. Basically, they would be sent to the Ottoman Empire in order to help the fledgling Ottoman Navy fend off the British. The two ships managed to beat the race by successfully landing in Constantinople before the British Royal Navy Bismarcked them, though the KMS Bismarck doesn't exist yet, so am I allowed to say that? The ship was then given to the Ottoman Empire, where it would stay, and it was renamed the Yavuz Sultan Selim, though I'll continue to call it the SMS Gobin for the rest of the video because, I mean, let's be honest, that's a bit of a mouthful. It primarily fought with Russian ships in the Black Seas and was involved in multiple skirmishes with the Imperial Russian Navy. Now, to be honest, her World War I career wasn't that impressive, if I'm going to be honest here. During the Battle of Imbros, the ship helped sink two monitors. Monitors are coastal defense ships, and basically imagine getting a battleship gun and strapping it to a tiny little boat. That's a monitor. When the war was over, the Gobin stayed in Ottoman hands. When the Ottoman Empire became the Turkish Republic, the ship stayed. The rest of its life is relatively uneventful. Or, well, at least in terms of what a battlecruiser should be doing. It honestly did a lot of things. For example, it carried the remains of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, an Ottoman general during World War I, and most importantly, the first president of the Republic of Turkey. However, she did not do much fighting and did more sitting around during World War II than anything. Her World War II career was even less eventful than World War I. It remained as a primary capital ship of Turkey for many years until 1950, when she was decommissioned. And here is the enraging bit. She was offered to the German government as a museum ship, but was turned down. In the end, the ship was scrapped in 1973. The world's last battlecruiser, or the last gun battlecruiser if you count the Kirov class, and not to mention, the last capital ship of the Kaiserliche Marine, was unceremoniously scrapped instead of being offered a wonderful place in its original home Germany as a museum ship. The last battlecruiser, the last true German naval ship, and the longest-serving dreadnought-era ship of all time, finished scrapping in 1976. She was the last dreadnought in existence outside of the United States when she was scrapped. Now, I believe the ship should have stayed around because of its inherent qualities, or, in other words, simply because she was the last of her kind in so many different ways. If I'm going to be honest, her career wasn't all that eventful, and on any other battlecruiser, if it had been, for example, the SMS Derflinger, I would be just as happy seeing the Derflinger instead of the Gobin up on as a museum. But at the end of the day, the Gobin was the last German battlecruiser. It was the last battlecruiser, the last German capital ship. Well, I think it's a real pity that she didn't get preserved. Now, the next two ships I'm about to say are defined by what they did, not by what they were. Another ship that should not have gotten scrapped, but turned into a museum is HMS Warspite. Note that I'll be going over her history in a very oversimplified manner, since it's so long and eventful, so if you really want to do Warspite justice, you should probably do some more research on her yourself, because I'm just going to hit the most basic points with her. Though, if I'm going to be honest, that's probably true for all the ships I'm talking about here. The HMS Warspite is another Dreadnought-era capital ship. HMS Warspite was one of two Queen Elizabeth-class battleships that was laid down in 1912, launched in 1915, and commissioned in that same year. Right off the bat, Warspite became famous by participation in the Battle of Jutland in 1916. But in all honesty, her World War I career isn't all that out of the norm. If I'm going to be honest, it's a sheer amount of battles it was in during World War II, and how she lasted for long. She was retrofitted during the period in between the World Wars. Now again, nothing out of the norm. She just had some issues due to being so freaking old. But when a war broke out in 1939, she joined the fight like all other ships. During her first battle in a long time, the battles of Narvik, she helped escort several convoys. She was then diverted to pursue the German battlecruisers Scharnhorst and Neischau. She participated in the neutralization of 8 German destroyers, and a Fairey Swordfish floatplane launched from the Warspite managed to sink a U-boat. She somehow stumbled out of the narrow fjords where the torpedoes should have had no issue with big ships like her, and continued on to the battle next year. In the Mediterranean, she battled Italian cruisers during the Battle of Calabria and successfully managed to sink a few. She even got a couple hits on Italian battleships, and set a record for the longest range naval gunnery hit. She bombarded positions during the Battle of Taranto, and battled more Italian naval ships during the Battle of Cape Matapan. The latter battle is what managed to ensure that the Regina Maria lost their hold over the oceans, and what gave the Royal Navy full superiority in the Mediterranean. She was used as an AA barge during the Battle of Crete, giving cover from airplanes. The ship was heavily damaged by German planes and was sent to the US in 1941 to once more be retrofitted. She came back to the war in 1942, and after a daring raid against Japanese forces that were getting a little too cozy around India, she came right back to the Mediterranean to help Allied troops invade Sicily. And it is during this moment that she earned the nickname the Grand Old Lady. Rear Admiral Cunningham inadvertently gave her this name when he said, "Operation well carried out. There's no question when the old lady lifts her skirts, she can run." Once Sicily was taken, she helped bombard positions during the Normandy landings, supporting the British advance on Sword Beach. She then helped the Americans at Utah Beach before heading to Gold Beach to once again help British soldiers land. At this point, she was more of a coastal bombardment vessel than a battleship. And on November 1st, 1944, Warspite fired her guns for a final time. Admiralty considered saving her as a museum vessel, as I am saying what should have happened, but the idea was rejected. In 1946, a year after the war, they agreed to scrap Warspite. Even on her way to the scrapyard, Warspite fought back. A storm blew Warspite off course, and the tugboat's cables detached. She beached herself in Prussia Cove, and would remain there until 1950, when they tried to refloat her. It failed. She was scrapped on the spot. I mean, being beached on a beach like that, I guess perhaps there really was no other way for Warspite, but it is a shame. Now, the third ship y'all may have heard of, or at least you might know the name. Maybe you know a lot about modern history. Maybe it's Star Trek. Third ship is USS Enterprise, but it's not the nuclear-powered one or the spaceship. Of course, an interesting way to put it would be the American adaptation of the Warspite, and definitely the most famous ship of World War II. Well, maybe besides the Bismarck. USS Enterprise. And of course, our all-American hero has to do everything. If the stories of these ships were movies, the SMS Gobin would be a tragedy. The Warspite may be a British war film about how you keep that stiff upper lip and battle on. If that's the case, the USS Enterprise is a classic Mary Sue in an American war movie. The USS Enterprise, CV-6, was the 7th ship named Enterprise. She was top of the line with fancy new radars and was initially used to ferry planes around. Laid down on the 16th of July 1934 and launched in May 1938, she was the second ship of her class, the Yorktown class. She was out for exercises, helping rookie pilots learn the basics of taking off a carrier and landing on December 7th, 1941. The day the Japanese bombed the U.S. Pacific Fleet in Pearl Harbor, killing over 2,000 men. The United States was under attack. Following the bombing, the USS Enterprise helped patrol the Hawaiian Islands in preparation for a potential attack. After engaging and sinking the submarine I-70, making her the first ship in the Pacific front of the war to sink a Japanese warship, she raided the Marshall Islands in February of 1942. Afterwards, she joined the famed Task Force 16, and her sister ship, Hornet, was the one to launch the Doolittle raid. And the Enterprise, of course, was right there when it all happened. Several B-25s took off and bombed the Japanese capital of Tokyo. And, of course, 5 days later, it was the USS Enterprise that would have her star moment during the Battle of Midway. Though missing the Battle of Coral Sea, Enterprise was available to participate in the Battle of Midway. The Japanese had wanted a decisive battle for a while, and they got one. On June 3rd at 9 a.m., an American squadron spotted a Japanese task force. The Battle of Midway was just getting started. On June 4th at 4:30, the attack commenced. The USS Yorktown had been hastily prepared that day before, and unbeknownst to the Japanese, there were 3 U.S. carriers present at the battle, not 2. As Nagato attacked the island, several U.S. ground-based fighters intercepted them. Japanese bombers took off the island unescorted, as the fighters remained behind to protect the island itself. The Japanese bombings failed, though, if I'm going to be honest, the American ones weren't that successful either. Next, planes from the USS Enterprise took flight. In what will be known as 5 minutes of fame, the McCluskey Division sank the Japanese aircraft carriers Akagi and Kaga. Her sister Yorktown sank the carrier Soryu, but was sunk herself by a submarine. The Japanese believed they had sunk the Enterprise, but they had actually sunk the Yorktown. The legendary sinking of the 2 best carriers of Japan and the perceived resurrection of the Big E, as the American sailors now called her, or Lucky E, gave her another nickname. The Japanese called her the Gray Ghost, the ship who just refused to sink. She sunk the heavy cruiser Mikuma and dozens more. The battle was a success, and the Japanese got the decisive victory. That is an American decisive victory, but hey, you said you wanted a decisive victory, right? Only Yorktown and Haman had been sunk, while the Japanese lost most of their fleet. After a brief period of rest, she sailed to the South Pacific, where she would fight the Eastern Solomon campaigns. Hornet was lost as well, leaving Big E as a sole American carrier in the Pacific. And she held off well. It was the Enterprise versus Japan. The Guadalcanal battles left Enterprise as a sole carrier and sole ship of her class, but it also left her a legend. Enterprise helped sink the battlecruiser Hei, and by the summer of 1943 were backed up by the brand new Essex-class and Independence-class carriers. After a brief refurbishing in Pearl Harbor, she returned to provide air support at the Battle of Makin. Enterprise launched ships also helped provide cover for Marines during the landing in Saipan. Following this, she participated in the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history. Afterwards, she headed back to the U.S. and was getting repairs in Canada when the war ended. After a brief tour of Europe, she was decommissioned. Though there were funds to try and turn her into a museum, they failed, and Enterprise was scrapped in 1958. Big E. Lucky E. The Gray Ghost. The Galloping Ghost. The ship who faced down fascist Japan alone was completely dismantled by 1960. Personally, I think this ship is the most legendary out of the other 3 ships, and I don't think I need to explain why we should have kept it. NT was a great ship, and I would definitely give her a visit, where she's still here today. She helped liberate my home nation from Japan too. So there you have it, the USS Enterprise, the 3rd ship that should have stayed.